The hospital waiting room in Boise, Idaho, was the kind of place where time moved differently. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the coffee in the pot had been sitting since morning, and the plastic chairs were designed to be uncomfortable enough that you couldn't really rest, but not so uncomfortable that you'd complain. It was 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in March, and Lucas Wright had been sitting in that waiting room for 6 hours. He was 7 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that were too old for his face. His mother, Sarah, was somewhere beyond the double doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" in surgery after a car accident that morning. A distracted driver had run a red light and T-boned her Honda. The police said she was lucky to be alive. Lucas didn't feel lucky. He sat alone in a cluster of chairs near the window, his backpack beside him, swinging his legs because they didn't quite reach the floor. A social worker had checked on him twice, asking if he needed anything, if there was anyone they could call. But Lucas's father was deployed overseas, Army, currently in Afghanistan, and his grandparents were driving from Montana, still 3 hours away. So Lucas waited. Alone. In his hands he held his most prized possession, a small toy motorcycle about 4 inches long, made of die-cast metal with rubber tires and incredible detail. It was a Harley-Davidson, black and chrome, and it had been a gift from his father before his last deployment. "Keep this safe for me," his dad had said. "When I get home, we'll get a real one someday and ride together." Lucas rubbed his thumb over the motorcycle's tiny engine, the metal warm from being held so long. He was trying not to cry, trying to be brave like his dad would want, but he was 7 and scared, and his mom was in surgery, and he didn't know if she was going to be okay. The waiting room door opened, and a man walked in. He was big, over 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a leather vest over a flannel shirt despite the indoor heating. The vest had patches on it, and Lucas recognized the style from pictures his dad had shown him, motorcycle club patches. The man's face was weathered, and his dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, streaked with gray. He looked tough, but not mean, and there was something sad in his eyes. The man walked to the reception desk and spoke quietly to the woman there. Lucas couldn't hear what they said, but he saw the receptionist's face soften with sympathy before pointing toward the double doors. The man nodded and walked to the waiting area, choosing a seat a few chairs away from Lucas. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Then the man noticed Lucas, noticed the toy motorcycle Lucas was holding, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. "That's a nice bike," the man said, his voice gentle despite his size. Lucas looked up. "Thanks. My dad gave it to me. He's got good taste." "That's a Harley Softail. I've got one just like it. Well, the real size version." "Really?" "Really. Been riding for 30 years. The man paused. "You waiting for someone?" Lucas nodded. "My mom. She was in a car accident. She's in surgery." The man's expression shifted to something Lucas recognized, adult concern, the kind that meant things were serious. "I'm sorry." "That's scary." "Yeah." Lucas felt his eyes start to burn again. "My dad's in Afghanistan. My grandparents are driving here, but they're still far away, so I'm just waiting. That's tough." "You're being really brave." Lucas shrugged. He didn't feel brave. He felt small and scared and alone. The man was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm Dominic. Most people call me Dom. I'm waiting for news about my brother. He was in a motorcycle accident earlier today." "Is he going to be okay?" "I don't know yet. We're both just waiting." They sat together in that strange kinship that exists in hospital waiting rooms, two people from completely different worlds, brought together by worry and hope and the universal experience of helplessness in the face of someone else's pain. After a while, Dom said, "Can I tell you something? When I'm worried, when things feel scary and out of control, I think about the best moments of my life, the times I felt most alive. Most of those moments were on my motorcycle, riding with my brothers, feeling free. It helps me remember that good things exist even when everything feels bad." Lucas thought about that. "What's your best moment?" Dom smiled, and it transformed his face. 5 years ago, my club organized a charity ride for kids with cancer. We raised $50,000 and got to meet these amazing kids who were fighting so hard to survive. One little girl, she was 6, bald from chemo, and she climbed on my bike and said it made her feel like a superhero. That feeling, making someone feel powerful when they felt powerless, that's my best moment." "That's nice," Lucas said quietly. Then, before he could stop himself, he asked, "Are you scared? About your brother?" Dom looked at him with such honest vulnerability that Lucas felt like he was being treated as an equal, not as a child. "Yeah, I'm terrified, but I'm trying to have hope, trying to believe he'll be okay." Lucas looked down at his toy motorcycle. He thought about his dad, about the real motorcycle they'd someday ride together, about his mom behind those double doors, fighting to survive, about this stranger who'd been kind enough to talk to a scared kid in a waiting room, and he made a decision. Lucas stood up and walked over to Dom, holding out the toy motorcycle. "Here. You should have this." Dom looked at the toy, then at Lucas, confusion and something like alarm in his eyes. "Kid, I can't take that. That's yours. Your dad gave it to you." "I know, but you need it more right now. You said thinking about motorcycles helps when you're scared, so you can hold this and think about your brother being okay, and when he's okay, you can give it back to me." "Lucas," Dom's voice was thick with emotion, "this is too important to you. I can't. Please, I want you to have it. Just for now, just until your brother's okay." Dom stared at this small boy offering his most treasured possession to a complete stranger, and Lucas saw tears well up in the man's eyes. Slowly, carefully, Dom reached out and took the toy motorcycle, holding it in his large hand like it was made of glass. "Thank you," Dom said, his voice breaking. This is the kindest thing anyone's ever done for me. I promise I'll take care of it, and I promise I'll give it back." Lucas nodded and went back to his chair, feeling somehow lighter despite having given away his dad's gift. Something about the gesture had made him feel less alone, less powerless. He'd helped someone. That mattered. They waited together, not talking much, but the silence was companionable now. After another hour, a doctor came through the double doors and called Lucas's name. Lucas jumped up, his heart hammering. "Your mom's out of surgery," the doctor said, kneeling down to Lucas's level. "She did great. She's going to be in the hospital for a while, but she's going to be okay." Lucas burst into tears, relief and joy, and the release of 6 hours of tension. The doctor patted his shoulder, and when Lucas looked up, he saw Dom standing nearby, also crying, smiling through the tears. "That's wonderful news," Dom said. "I'm so glad she's okay." 10 minutes later, another doctor came for Dom with similar news. His brother had made it through surgery and would recover. Dom sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands, and Lucas could see his shoulders shaking. Lucas's grandparents arrived shortly after, rushing in and scooping Lucas into their arms. As they prepared to take him to see his mother, Lucas turned to Dom. "Your brother's okay," Lucas said, "so you can keep the motorcycle." For remembering, Dom shook his head. "No, a promise is a promise. I'll give it back, but not today. Someday, when we meet again." "How will you find me?" Dom smiled. "I'll figure it out. That's what bikers do. We keep our promises." They shook hands solemnly, man and boy, strangers who'd shared one of the worst and best days of their lives. Then Lucas left with his grandparents to see his mother, and Dom stayed to see his brother, and their paths diverged. But Dominic Russo kept that toy motorcycle. He kept it on his nightstand for 3 years, a reminder of the day a 7-year-old boy had shown him what true generosity looked like. And he'd made a promise. He intended to keep it. The years passed. Lucas's mother recovered fully from her injuries. His father came home from Afghanistan after his deployment and kept his promise too. When Lucas turned 13, they bought a real motorcycle, a used Yamaha, and Lucas learned to ride. Not legally on the street yet, but on private property, his father teaching him to respect the machine and the road. Lucas grew up. He did well in school, made friends, joined the wrestling team. He was a good kid, respectful, hardworking, kind. His parents were proud, and sometimes, late at night, Lucas would think about the man in the hospital waiting room, about the toy motorcycle he'd given away, about the promise Dom had made. He wondered if Dom's brother had recovered, wondered if Dom still had the motorcycle, wondered if they'd ever actually meet again, or if that had just been something adults said to make kids feel better. Meanwhile, Dominic Russo hadn't forgotten. He'd spent 3 years trying to track down Lucas Wright, but hospital privacy laws made it difficult, and he only had a first name and a rough age. But Dom was persistent. He made calls, used his connections in the veteran and biker communities, eventually found someone who knew a Wright family with a deployed father and a son named Lucas, who'd been in the hospital that March day. When Dom finally confirmed he'd found the right Lucas Wright, the boy was already 10 years old. Dom could have reached out then, could have returned the motorcycle and been done with it. But something stopped him. He'd been watching from a distance, not creepily, just keeping tabs through mutual connections, and he'd seen Lucas growing into a good young man, respectful, hard-working, kind to others. Dom had an idea, a bigger idea, an idea that required patience and planning and the help of his entire motorcycle club. He kept watching, kept tracking Lucas's progress through school. When Lucas started high school, Dom was there in the background, making sure the kid had what he needed, working through intermediaries to ensure opportunities came Lucas's way, a wrestling scholarship to summer camp paid for by an anonymous donor, a part-time job at a shop owned by a club member who'd been instructed to give the right kid a fair chance. Lucas never knew. His parents assumed these were just lucky breaks, the kind of good fortune that sometimes came to people who worked hard. And Lucas did work hard, excelled in school, became captain of the wrestling team, started talking about college and maybe joining the army like his father. Dom watched it all with pride, like a guardian angel on a motorcycle, waiting for the right moment to reveal himself. That moment came when Lucas was 18, a senior in high school, 3 months from graduation. Dom called a meeting of his motorcycle club, the Iron Brotherhood, and several allied clubs from across the region. 11 years ago, Dom said to the assembled bikers, I was in the worst moment of my life. My brother was in surgery after a motorcycle accident, and I thought I might lose him. I was sitting in that hospital waiting room, terrified and alone, when a 7-year-old kid came up to me. His own mother was in surgery. His dad was deployed. He had every reason to be selfish, to keep to himself, to focus on his own fear. But instead, he gave me his most prized possession, a toy motorcycle his father had given him, because he thought it would help me feel less scared. Dom held up the toy motorcycle, still perfectly preserved. That kid is graduating high school in 3 months. His name is Lucas Wright. He's a good kid, honor student, athlete, plans to serve his country. And I made him a promise that day. I promised I'd give this back to him. I intend to keep that promise, but I want to do more than that. I want to show him what his kindness meant, what it created. He looked around at the club members. That toy motorcycle got me through the worst day of my life. It reminded me that good people exist, that kids can be braver than adults, that small gestures matter. And I've kept it for 11 years, waiting for the right moment. Graduation is that moment. Dom outlined his plan. The bikers listened, and one by one they agreed. Word spread to other clubs. The Iron Brotherhood reached out to allies across Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Washington. The response was overwhelming. People wanted to be part of this, wanted to honor the boy who'd shown extraordinary kindness at 7 years old, wanted to prove that promises kept, even when they took 11 years. On graduation day, Lucas had no idea what was about to happen. He wore his cap and gown, sat with his class on the football field where the ceremony was being held, listened to speeches about the future and possibility and making the world better. His parents were in the bleachers, proud and beaming. His father, now retired from the army, had tears in his eyes. The principal was in the middle of a speech about character and service when the sound began. Low at first, barely audible over the PA system, then growing. The unmistakable rumble of motorcycles, many motorcycles. People started turning in their seats, looking toward the parking lot. The principal stopped talking, confused, and then they appeared. Motorcycles, dozens of them, hundreds, streaming into the parking lot in formation, their engines creating a thunder that echoed across the football field. They kept coming. Harleys, Hondas, Yamahas, Indians, all ridden by men and women in leather vests with patches identifying their clubs. Iron Brotherhood, Desert Riders, Road Warriors, Veterans, MC, Christian Riders, Chrome Angels. They kept coming until the parking lot was full, and they started lining the perimeter of the football field. 500 motorcycles, 500 riders, all of them there for one reason. The engines cut off in synchronized silence, and the rider in front, Dominic Russo, 11 years older but still unmistakable, dismounted and walked toward the ceremony with something small in his hand. The principal, completely bewildered, stepped aside as Dom walked to the podium. Lucas sat in his seat, frozen, his mind racing to understand what was happening. Why were there 500 bikers at his graduation? What was going on? Dom tapped the microphone. Sorry for the interruption. My name is Dominic Russo. I'm here to keep an 11-year-old promise to a young man named Lucas Wright. Lucas felt every eye in the stadium turn to him. His heart started pounding. Dom continued. 11 years ago, Lucas was 7 years old, sitting in a hospital waiting room while his mother was in surgery after a car accident. His father was deployed. His grandparents hadn't arrived yet. He was alone and scared. I happened to be in that same waiting room, waiting for news about my brother, who'd been in a motorcycle accident. Lucas and I talked, and when I told him I was scared, this 7-year-old boy, who had every reason to be focused on his own fear, gave me his most treasured possession. Dom held up the toy motorcycle, and Lucas felt his breath catch. He remembered. He remembered that day, remembered the big man in the leather vest, remembered giving away his dad's gift because it felt like the right thing to do. This toy motorcycle belonged to Lucas's father, Dom said. It was a promise between father and son about the future. And Lucas gave it to me, a complete stranger, because he thought it would help me feel less scared. It did. It got me through the worst day of my life, and I promised Lucas I'd give it back someday. Today is that day. Dom gestured for Lucas to come forward. Lucas stood on shaky legs and walked through his classmates, up onto the stage. Up close, he could see that Dom was crying, that this huge, tough biker was emotional and vulnerable and completely genuine. Lucas Wright, Dom said, you taught me something that day. You taught me that kindness doesn't require wealth or power or even comfort. You taught me that even when you're scared and hurting, you can still help someone else. You taught me what it means to be brave. He held out the toy motorcycle. Lucas took it with trembling hands, feeling the familiar weight of it, seeing that it had been kept perfectly, cherished for 11 years. I've been keeping track of you, Dom said, not in a creepy way, just making sure you were okay, that you were growing up into the kind of man I thought you'd become, and you have. You're an honor student, you're an athlete and a leader, you're planning to serve your country like your father did. You're exactly the kind of person the world needs more of. Dom turned to address the crowd. These 500 bikers behind me, they're here because they believe in honoring goodness when we see it. Lucas was 7 years old when he showed me kindness I didn't deserve, and we wanted him to know, as he graduates and enters the world, that his kindness mattered, that it's remembered, that it created ripples. The bikers behind Dom started their engines again, a rolling thunder of approval, and the crowd erupted in applause. Lucas stood there, holding his toy motorcycle, crying openly, overwhelmed by the moment. Dom pulled Lucas into a hug. Thank you, he said quietly, just for Lucas, for teaching me what matters, for showing me that good people exist, for being brave when I needed someone to be brave for me. I can't believe you kept it, Lucas managed. I can't believe you found me. I promised, and I always keep my promises. The ceremony resumed after the bikers left. They didn't want to overshadow Lucas's graduation, but the energy had completely changed. What had been a standard high school graduation had become something legendary, something people would talk about for years. After the ceremony, Lucas's parents found him in the crowd, both crying. His father pulled him into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you. Not just for graduating, but for being the kind of person who 500 strangers would show up for. I just gave him a toy, Lucas said. I didn't do anything special. You did everything special, his mother said. You saw someone hurting and you helped them, even though you were hurting too. That's character, Lucas. That's who you are. The story of Lucas and the 500 bikers went viral. Someone had recorded Dom's speech and posted it online, and within days it had millions of views. News outlets picked it up. Talk shows wanted to interview Lucas. The story resonated because it was pure and true, a child showing kindness, an adult honoring that kindness 11 years later, a community coming together to celebrate goodness. But Lucas stayed humble. He did a few interviews, always redirecting attention to Dom and the biker community, emphasizing that the real story was about keeping promises and honoring kindness, not about him being special. "I was just a scared kid who gave away a toy," Lucas said in one interview. "Dom's the one who kept it for 11 years. Dom's the one who tracked me down. Dom's the one who organized 500 people to show up. That's the extraordinary part." But Dom disagreed when they were interviewed together. Lucas was 7. He had less than nothing. His mom was in surgery. His dad was in a war zone. He was alone. And he still gave. That's extraordinary. Most adults wouldn't do that. But this kid did. The two of them formed a lasting friendship. Dom became like an uncle to Lucas, staying in touch, offering guidance, being present for important moments. When Lucas graduated from college 4 years later with a degree in engineering, Dom was there. When Lucas joined the Army and completed basic training, Dom was there. When Lucas got married at 25, Dom stood up in the wedding party. And Lucas, in turn, became involved in the Iron Brotherhood's charitable work. He helped organize toy drives for children's hospitals, a tribute to the toy that had changed both their lives. He mentored younger kids, teaching them the same lessons Dom had taught him about kindness and keeping promises. The toy motorcycle itself became a symbol. Dom had it professionally preserved in a display case, and it traveled to motorcycle rallies and charity events, a tangible reminder of what was possible when people chose to be kind. The story was told and retold: the 7-year-old boy and the scared biker, the 11-year wait, the 500 motorcycles at graduation. And every time someone heard the story, they'd ask the same question: why did you give away something so precious? Lucas's answer evolved over the years, but the core remained the same, because at that moment, he needed it more than I did. And because sometimes the best thing you can do with something you love is share it with someone who's hurting. 10 years after the graduation, Dom was diagnosed with cancer, pancreatic, stage 4. The doctors gave him 6 months. Dom, who'd survived 40 years of hard living and dangerous riding, was finally facing something he couldn't outrun. Lucas flew home immediately, taking leave from his job to be with Dom during treatment. They spent long hours together, Dom in the hospital bed, Lucas in the chair beside him, talking about everything and nothing, about life and death, about meaning and legacy, about the strange twists of fate that brought people together. "I keep thinking about that day," Dom said during one visit, his voice weak from chemotherapy. "How random it was. My brother's accident happened 5 minutes earlier. It's a different hospital. 5 minutes later, you're already gone with your grandparents. But instead, we were both there at the exact same moment. You think that's chance?" "I don't know what it is," Lucas said, "but I'm grateful for it." "Me too. You gave me more than a toy that day. You gave me a reminder that goodness exists, and I've spent 21 years trying to live up to that reminder, trying to be the kind of person that 7-year-old boy thought I was. You succeeded. You're one of the best men I know." Dom smiled weakly. "Your dad would be proud. I'm proud. You turned out good, Lucas Wright." Dom passed away 3 weeks later, surrounded by his Iron Brotherhood family and by Lucas, who held his hand and told him stories about all the lives he'd touched, all the good he'd done, all the ways he'd mattered. At the funeral, Lucas gave the eulogy. He stood in front of a church packed with bikers and community members and told the story one more time: the hospital waiting room, the toy motorcycle, the promise that took 11 years to keep, the 500 bikers at graduation. "Dom used to say that I taught him about kindness that day," Lucas said, "but the truth is, he taught me more. He taught me that promises matter, that following through matters, that 11 years of keeping a toy safe for a kid you barely knew matters. He taught me that the biggest gestures come from remembering the smallest ones." Lucas held up the toy motorcycle, now in its display case. "This belonged to my father. Then I gave it to Dom. Now it belongs to all of us, a reminder of what's possible when we choose to be kind, when we choose to remember, when we choose to honor the good in others." He looked at the assembled crowd. "Dom made me promise to continue the work, the charity rides, the toy drives, the mentoring. He made me promise to tell the story, to keep sharing it, to make sure people understand that small acts of kindness can change everything. I made that promise, and I intend to keep it." The Iron Brotherhood established a scholarship fund in Dom's name for students who demonstrated exceptional character and kindness. Lucas ran it, ensuring that kids like his 7-year-old self, kids who helped others even when they had nothing, got the support they needed. And every year, on the anniversary of the graduation where 500 bikers had shown up, Lucas organized a memorial ride. It grew larger every year. First hundreds of bikes, then thousands, all riding to honor Dom's memory and the lesson he'd taught. That promises matter, that kindness matters, that seeing goodness and choosing to honor it matters. At the 10th anniversary ride, Lucas stood in front of 10,000 bikers and told the story again. But this time, he ended differently. Dom kept a toy motorcycle for 11 years because a 7-year-old boy showed him kindness. And that act of keeping a promise changed my life. But it didn't stop there. The 500 bikers who showed up at my graduation, they weren't just honoring me. They were honoring the idea that goodness deserves recognition. And everyone who heard that story and decided to be a little kinder, to keep their own promises, to honor the good people in their lives, they're part of this too. He held up the display case with the toy motorcycle. This isn't just my story, or Dom's story. It's everyone's story. It's what happens when we choose to see each other, to help each other, to remember that we're all connected. A child gave a toy motorcycle to a stranger. Years later, 500 bikers showed up at his graduation, and decades later, 10,000 of us are here, proving that the ripples never stop. The engines roared in approval, a thunder that echoed across the Idaho landscape, a sound that said, "We remember, we honor, we continue." And somewhere, Lucas liked to think, Dom was riding too, free and whole and proud of what they'd built together, from one moment of kindness in a hospital waiting room 28 years ago. The child had given a toy motorcycle to a stranger. Years later, 500 bikers had shown up at his graduation, and decades later, the legacy continued. Thousands of bikers riding in formation, scholarships awarded to kind kids, toys delivered to sick children, promises kept across years and generations, all because a 7-year-old boy had chosen to be kind when it would have been easier to be selfish, all because a biker had chosen to remember when it would have been easier to forget, all because 500 strangers had chosen to show up when they could have stayed home. That was the power of small gestures honored. That was the power of promises kept. That was the power of seeing goodness and refusing to let it go, unrecognized. The child gave a toy motorcycle to a stranger. Years later, 500 bikers showed up at his graduation. And the story never ended. It just kept rippling outward, changing lives, inspiring kindness, proving that the smallest acts of generosity could create the largest waves of change. One toy, one promise, one graduation, endless impact. That was the legacy. That was the gift. That was what happened when people chose to be good and other people chose to honor that goodness. And it all started with a 7-year-old boy in a hospital waiting room, offering his most precious possession to ease a stranger's fear. Everything changed from there. Everything mattered from there. Everything grew from there. One small act, one kept promise, everything.